They called him El Radar, not because it sounded good on a poster, but because it was the only honest explanation anyone could find. He didn't react to punches, he knew they were coming. And when you watched him long enough, something unsettling emerged. Benítez wasn't defending, he was predicting. He wasn't avoiding violence, he was cancelling it before it existed. Most fighters learn to survive inside chaos. Wilfred Benítez learned to see through it. And that might be the most dangerous gift a human being can have in a sport built on impact, because boxing doesn't reward understanding. Boxing rewards performance. When the performance stops, the sport has a habit of leaving genius behind. This isn't a story about a wasted talent, it's a story about what happens when a child understands the truth of violence. How does a former world champion spend a year homeless in Argentina, fail brain scans, and still return to the ring? The first thing you notice isn't his speed, it's his calm. A lot of great fighters look confident because they're brave. Benítez looks calm because the situation, to him, feels already answered. He stands in front of a man who wants to hurt him, and the body behaves like it's heard the plan in advance. A jab comes, he's not late. A hook arrives, he's not early. He's already moved. It's not magic, it's something colder. It's intelligence expressed through movement and timing. And this is where the legend becomes uncomfortable. Benítez became a professional at 15. Not a prospect, not one to watch, a professional. No one asks a 15-year-old how long his brain will last in a sport with a cost his brain tissue. And he doesn't just survive it, he grows inside it. At 17 years old, he steps into a world title fight in San Juan against Antonio Cervantes, a long-reigning champion, experienced, hardened, seasoned in a way that a teenager shouldn't understand. Benítez wins a split decision over 15 rounds and becomes the youngest world champion in boxing history. 17, 15 rounds, a world title. He doesn't win like a kid who got away with it. He wins like a man who already knows where the danger lives. This is the first moral fracture in his story, the one nobody wants to say out loud. When a 17-year-old can outthink grown men in a sport like boxing, the world calls it destiny. Destiny is just a pretty word for risk. Here is what makes Benítez different from almost every prodigy story. He isn't a fireball, he isn't chaos, he isn't a reckless miracle. He's quiet, and quiet fighters get punished. Not by their opponents, but by culture. Because boxing doesn't just want winners, it wants a feeling. To bleed in a way that proves something. It wants you to take a risk that makes people stand up. It wants violence with a storyline. Benítez doesn't give you that, not in the obvious way. He gives you something harder. He gives you the sense that violence is optional, that punches are guesses. Bravery to Benítez was often just incompetence with an audience. People start to call him slick, talented, defensive, but those words are too small. Because Benítez's defence isn't avoidance, it's refusal. He refuses to donate his brain to the entertainment. The sport resents this. The crowd wants a storm. Benítez brings weather control. Promoters don't know how to sell it. Fans don't know whether to clap or complain. He wins, but the room feels unsatisfied. And that tension becomes a shadow following him. Because when you can win without giving the audience what it thinks it came for, they start to demand a higher price. They start to ask for proof. Are you great or efficient? And only one of those sells tickets. And eventually, the question leads him to the golden era where the sport's appetite was enormous and mercy was limited. November the 30th, 1979. Benítez steps into the ring with Sugar Ray Leonard. Not just a great fighter, a cultural force, Benítez is the champion. But he walks into Leonard's world, and the fight reveals a mind working faster than consequence. He reads, he subtracts, he anticipates, he makes Leonard miss, he makes Leonard think, and for long stretches, the fight feels like a test of who can stay calm the longest. But then the sport's hidden rule appears. When the fight is close, the performer is rewarded. Late in the 15th round, Leonard catches him, floors him, and then with seconds left the referee stops it. Leonard wins by TKO with 6 seconds remaining, ahead on the scorecards at the time of the stoppage. But this isn't Benítez getting stopped, it's the emotional reality of that ending. Benítez didn't lose because he was clueless, he lost because intelligence doesn't own close fights. A certain kind of fighter starts to change, because the sport doesn't just take rounds from you, it takes assumptions. It takes the belief that your intelligence can always protect you. And once that belief cracks, the rest of your career becomes a negotiation with fear. Not fear of getting hit, fear of being proved wrong. January the 30th, 1982. Roberto Durán, a different kind of danger. Durán isn't trying to outpoint you, he's trying to drag your soul into the dark. Benítez controls much of the fight and wins a close, unanimous decision using jabs, hooks and defensive skill to keep Durán from turning into a brawl. On paper, it's a beautiful win. In spirit, it's the clearest statement of what Benítez is. He's not a highlight machine, he's a mind. He's a rare fighter who can stand in front of a legend and make the legend look ordinary. And yet this is the bitter paradox. The better Benítez is, the harder it is for the sport to love him. Because his greatness doesn't explode, it disappears things. He makes danger vanish. And for many people, that feels like he's stealing the show. But that fight also signals something else, because when you fight at that level for that long, relying on timing and perception, you're spending resources you can't measure. Not money, not stamina, something more fragile. Your brain's ability to remain precise. And once precision begins to dull, even slightly, a fighter like Benítez doesn't just become less effective, he becomes vulnerable in the worst way. His entire style is built on being early, not brave. In December 1981, New Orleans. Thomas Hearns. Hearns is tall, violent, clean as a blade. This is the kind of fight where you can't only be clever, you have to be physically undeniable. Hearns wins, a majority decision over 15 rounds. And takes Benítez's title. But the real story isn't the decision, it's what the fight represents. Benítez, the master of small margins, fighting a man whose margins were enormous, reach, power, leverage. And it's here you feel the first serious shift. Not in his talent, in his relationship with the sport. Because after Hearns, the Benítez story stops being about mastery and the most dangerous thing in boxing. Not being outclassed, not being knocked out, drift. Where discipline loosens, where the body takes more, where the mind can no longer keep the same clean distance from damage. From here, this is not a boxing story. By the time the losses came, something else had already gone missing. Not his skill, not his courage, his options. Boxing had arrived before adulthood, before any other identity had time to form. There was no gradual transition, no second language for life. So when the decline began, stopping didn't feel like rest, It felt like erasure. Benítez didn't make reckless decisions, he made inevitable ones. Inside a man shaped entirely by one solution: fight again. Each comeback wasn't denial, it was survival, because when your self-worth is built before adulthood, walking away doesn't feel like growth, it feels like disappearing. And boxing had never taught him how to disappear safely. From here on, every fight is a debt. No best defence ever montage, no upbeat scoring, because the tragedy of Benítez is not that he lost, it's that he kept going. He fought on past his peak. He moves through the late years like a man trying to find the exact moment he lost himself. And eventually, the damage stops being theoretical, it becomes visible. For a year, Wilfred Benítez was homeless in Argentina. No entourage, no protection, no plan. He drifted, unsupported, unrecognised. Medical scans showed damage, enough that boxing should have ended permanently. Brain scans failed. The sport should have stopped him. It didn't, and neither did he. Because desperation isn't chaos. It's momentum without breaks. In 2002, degenerative brain disease had taken hold. Leonard visits Benítez. Benítez doesn't know who he is. The years have taken that. Leonard sits beside him as footage is played, then something flickers. Recognition, brief and fragile. Benítez turns to Leonard and says, "Ray, I did not train for that fight. Not the belts, not the money, not the nights that shook arenas, just the labour he refused. A man's identity returning for a moment, not through joy, but through violence. That's not nostalgia, that's an indictment. Cruelty captured. The sport carved its deepest memories into him, and those are the last things that remain." Today, Wilfred Benítez lives in a small flat in Chicago. No memory of the past, no recall of what he once was. He's fed through a tube. He requires constant care, 24 hours a day. That care is provided by his sister, who never left. The radar that once saw everything no longer recognises the past, but someone remembers it for him, and that is how the story ends. Not with a belt, not with a verdict, but with what remains and the quiet devotion that stayed when everything else was gone. Boxing remembers knockouts, it remembers blood, it remembers drama, it remembers the nights that sell. But boxing has a quieter habit. It forgets the men whose greatness was subtle. It forgets the technicians, the thinkers, the ones that didn't offer themselves up like sacrifice. And Benítez is the ultimate proof. He may have been the most naturally gifted defensive mind of that era, the fifth king, who shared time with Leonard, Hearns, Durán and Hagler, and yet his name often floats like a rumour, not a monument, because there's nothing easy to sell about this kind of brilliance. There's no simple moral. It's not work hard and win, it's something darker and truer. A child can be born with perfect instincts. A child can solve a violent puzzle. A child can become champion, and still, the world can fail to protect him. So what do we do with that? Some people choose the sentimental route. They turn it into a cautionary poster. A sad story. Benítez wasn't broken by weakness. He was broken by what the sport is. A machine that eats youth and calls it glory. Boxing loves genius when it's entertaining, but genius can be lost without ever choosing to leave.